All right, good morning, Mainline Parent and Philadelphia Family Communities. I'm Pamela Badalato of Mainline Parent and Philadelphia Family, and I'm here this morning with Sawa Suleiman from Nemours Children's Hospital and Matt Ercolani from Mainline Health. Dr. Suleiman is a pediatric infectious disease specialist at Nemours Children's Hospital. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, Dr. Suleiman has been a trusted source of information for parents in the Delaware Valley, especially in context of keeping children safe during school reopenings and the COVID-19 vaccine. Matthew is a behavioral therapist at Mainline Health's Miramont Outpatient Center. Originally a public school teacher, Matt incorporates his love of music in his counseling practice through a combination of both psychotherapeutic and music therapy techniques. Matt specializes in treating adolescents and members of the LGBTQ+ community. Our main topic this morning was to bring questions from our community and local parents to our experts here about COVID-19, again, the Delta variant and its impact on our children's return to school. So thank you both so much for being here and for taking time to meet with us last week to discuss the things we wanted to talk about for our community today. I think we want to get started right away with just talking about the return to school and the risk of COVID as it stands in comparison to what we were doing last year and this year. Whoever wants to grab that one first.
Oh, I can certainly start. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sawa Suleiman again. Thank you for the introduction. A year ago, actually, I have a cat here, everyone. No one pay attention to her. She's gonna come across the screen multiple times. A year ago, actually, we were in a much better position as far as COVID-19 and the case numbers of COVID-19 than we are now, which is a little bit ironic that a year ago we weren't starting school and now we are. And so, but a lot has changed. A lot has changed. We know a lot more than we did before. And certainly all of us, parents and families and children, are acutely aware of COVID and know more about it and how we need to, what we need to do to prevent it. So where we are currently, the two biggest things are that we have the vaccine, number one, and number two, we have the Delta variant. One good thing, one bad thing. So the COVID-19 vaccine, certainly for those 12 and up, is approved. And so that is very helpful for our educators, for parents, for grandparents, and for sort of the upper middle school and high school kids. And so that is helpful. What is not helpful is the Delta variant. We were cruising at great rates until June, end of June, and really end of July, actually. June was such a good month. And end of July, we really saw these numbers increase. The Delta variant has taken over as a predominant strain. And the crummy thing about the Delta variant is it is at least 2 times more transmissible than the natural variant that we have seen. And that really has thrown a huge wrench into the way that we look at COVID-19. And so all the same mitigation strategies are there, the same things we've been doing: social distancing, wearing our masks, washing our hands, and being very conscious of those things. Even with the vaccine, we really have to prep ourselves to be careful because it is more transmissible. And even though within 6 feet, 3 to 6 feet really, and 15 minutes is the rule for exposure, we have to still be extra careful and wear our mask in those situations. So I think the biggest thing that I would say, looking at previously a year ago and now, is that we have a good and a bad. But I think schools, I have 3 kids myself, 2 that are school age. Schools are rocking it for the most part. They're really like, they get it. I don't know every school in every school district, but for the most part, what I'm hearing is that schools are prepped, man. They are ready to go, but we still have to do our part. And so I'll pause there because I could talk a lot about COVID, but I think that's the biggest difference in where we are now.
I think that's true too. You know, we kind of know what we're doing a little more than we did last year. Mm-hmm. Matt, would you have anything to add to this intro back to school?
Yeah, just you know, I think it's interesting, and I know we had discussed this before. I can remember a time when, hey, it was just, oh yeah, we're gonna all be in our houses for 2 weeks, and then everything will be back to normal. And I think part of this ongoing stress is we don't have an end date, you know. And really, I think it's important to acknowledge that this is really kind of a group trauma that 7.8 billion people are experiencing. And any sort of a trauma reaction, like, I don't know about you guys, but I notice that I'm more aggravated and kind of more on edge and just dealing with the long-term stress of this. We like to say that any sort of a trauma response is a normal response to an abnormal situation. So I think more than anything else, give yourself a little grace, please, and give others in your life a little bit of grace and say, hey, this is a really weird, horrible thing. Let me take a breath and acknowledge that and be okay with just kind of getting through for right now.
So going off of that, I was curious, for people who maybe aren't as well versed in like mental health and recognizing that the signs of trauma, are there any like warning signs you would notice in children that parents should be aware of when they're returning to school in terms of anxiety or any of this trauma you're talking about?
Sure. So a lot of times, and I think we're still kind of trying to figure out what our new normal looks like, right? But a lot of times we'll see things like, okay, more emotional outbursts over seemingly small things like, hey, we're having macaroni instead of pizza for dinner tonight, and an emotional outburst where maybe there wouldn't have been one before. Or if your child's reporting worries, anxiety, whether related to school or whether related to other things, because a lot of times that anxiety can kind of be nefarious and pop up in places you might not expect. Isolation is another one. Becoming more withdrawn is definitely one. Just any sort of changes in routine or kind of how they're presenting with their personality.
Thanks. So I think a question we've been getting a lot, especially from parents who have kids in like lower school, elementary school, the news just keeps changing about vaccines for kids. Over the weekend, I think there was more news that maybe it'll be ready for kids age 5 and up, by November, I think I saw. So I guess this goes to both of you. Where are we on that? How confident are you on that timeline? Just bring us up to date on that.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So the vaccine, so Moderna and Pfizer, the 2 mRNA vaccines, and there's Moderna and Pfizer, 2 mRNA, excuse me, and then the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Here, where we are currently is that Pfizer is approved 12 and up. And so Pfizer is available to any of those kiddos. We are hoping to have some Pfizer data for 5 to 11-year-olds. They did just come out with some news over the weekend. Things change in real time, hopefully by the end of October. So what has to essentially happen is the FDA, the data is submitted to the FDA. The FDA then reviews it like they would review any vaccine data. They certainly know the urgency with which we are all anxiously awaiting this. And then if they approve it at their meeting, which they have to set a meeting, they have to review the data, set a meeting, and then say, okay, we approve it. And then the CDC, then an ACIP, which is sort of the governing body over vaccines with the CDC, says, yes, we agree. That's a very rapid fashion. And then literally like days later, the vaccine could be available for 5 to 11-year-olds. I have to say, I was thinking just in what we've been learning and hearing that probably we might have vaccine for 5 to 11-year-olds by the end of the year. This is promising for sure, that it could be available, maybe even in November after they're able to review the data sort of as we approach holiday time. So I think that is encouraging. Under 5 is going to take some time. That's easily going to be 2022 because a lot of those studies are ongoing. But I do think that the Pfizer vaccine will have some data, and then Moderna will certainly follow. So that is incredibly encouraging. And then we'll have to learn, how many doses, because it can be a bit different depending upon, because vaccines are just different under 12 years of age in any vaccine. So it may be more doses, it may be a different actual dose itself. We'll just have to see the data that they submit in the studies that they did. But yes, everyone should be encouraged that we could have some data and our kids, both of my boys could be vaccinated because they're in that age group, before the end of the year.
I love that. Before I go up with my next question, I realized that during my introductions, I forgot to introduce my partner here. Laura Swartz is our Philadelphia Family and Mainline Parent editor, and she always joins me here for these Facebook Lives, so I don't feel like I'm grilling our guests. It's always nice to have someone go back and forth with the question making and question sharing. So my apologies for not introducing her to you at the beginning. But I wanted to continue in that vaccine vein, just to talk about any advice that you may give to parents or that you can share with parents to give to their peers when they might be on the fence about vaccinating their kids once it does get approved. We know that so many people are hesitant about the vaccine because of its newness or its approval, or you know, maybe their kids have had COVID, so they feel like their antibodies are going to be with them for a while. So we'd love to get some more information like that. And for those that are watching along here, if you have any questions that you'd like for Laura and I to share with Dr. Suleiman and Matt, you may comment right on the Facebook Live feed, and we will get those questions to them as well. So go ahead, back to the vaccine and encouraging those who may be a little hesitant.
Yeah, so this is a hot topic in my world, as you can imagine, as an infectious disease doctor in general for any vaccine, much less the COVID vaccine. So listen, I validate you know, parents' concerns about vaccine. It is mRNA technology. It's not that new, actually. It's been around for a little bit of time, but we haven't had an mRNA vaccine, you know, that's been a standard childhood vaccine or a standard adult vaccine in our regimen. So that part is new. But what I would say is, listen, like if there are any questions, there are different things that different families have questions about, whether it's because they've just heard things in the media, or because they've had reactions to vaccines, or because they just don't feel like they know enough. And that's been my experience, is that most people just feel like they are hearing bits and pieces here and there, and they just want to know more. I would encourage you to talk to your physicians, to talk to your pediatricians, to talk to your family medicine physicians, and ask them, you know, if, you know, how they feel about that vaccine, and see if they can give you, I mean, can give data all day long, but, you know, there's, it's really often you have that bond between your practitioner. And so ask them how they feel about it. It is a safe vaccine, whether it's Moderna or Pfizer or J&J, they are all safe vaccines. They underwent very rigorous testing. I know it seems fast, and it was certainly fast, but there was a sole purpose, and the FDA really dedicated time. Not that they don't dedicate time to vaccines, but they have many things that they do. And when COVID happened, and this is like a #1 public health problem, they said, this is our focus, and they prioritized. And so whenever things came up for review, it happened very quickly because they knew the urgency. And so I would say, listen, if you feel strongly about, you know, you're like, I feel comfortable vaccinating my child, but your neighbor and good friend is questioning it, just ask them, like, you know, what question? I had a bunch of questions. This is where I found information. Have you talked to your doctor? Those types of things. Because the last thing I want anyone to feel is that they're getting bullied into a vaccine. I think I want everyone to feel empowered, that they have the understanding about the vaccine, the safety of the vaccine. It is very, very safe. And there's always the possibility of adverse reactions. That can happen with any vaccine. But they have studied hundreds of thousands of adults and kids, and we have quite a bit of data. Most vaccines have reactions within 2 months after getting the vaccine. We're going to have more than 2 months of data before 5 to 11-year-old doses come up. So that is really good. And we have now a lot more of that data in 12 and up. So I think if you're struggling to talk to family members or friends about the vaccine, I would say share with them what you know, share with them where you went, as far as either websites or data, and say, talk to your doctor, talk to your nurse practitioner, talk to whoever your primary care provider is, and say, how, you know, let's just talk about the vaccine. And they're all very well versed in it by now. So that's what I would encourage you to do.
That sounds great. This one might be more of a question for you, Matt. Dealing with the anger or frustration we might feel towards those who aren't doing the same things we are doing, you know, and the royal one here, you know, because I may not be doing all these things all the time either. But for those who are super cautious, or for those who aren't feeling the need to be, how to deal with the frustrations of the other, of someone who's not, having only outdoor mass play dates versus indoor sleepovers with all random people, or, just dealing with that, because it does make for some awkward situations.
That's a great question. And I think it can be tough because I think we all have a different comfort level, and we've all had evolving comfort levels, throughout the last year and a half. Like, I think my in-laws have not changed a single habit of theirs for the entire time. And I certainly have some thoughts about that. I keep going back to this idea that first and foremost, it's okay to set boundaries, and it's okay if your comfort level is different than someone else's is. No is a complete sentence saying, hey, we're not really seeing people who are not doing this, or we're not really seeing people outside of our immediate household. Like, that's okay. I think there's also the anger, because part of that trauma response we were talking about earlier is we want to be angry at somebody. We want to be angry at something or other people or whatever, because this really kind of stinks. And it's hard not to feel like, hey, I'm doing my part. I'm doing everything I can. I've been shut up at my house for however long. Why aren't you doing the same thing? Just taking a breath, I think, and doing some acceptance exercises and saying, like, hey, I'm doing what I need to do to make sure that I'm safe, and to make sure that my family members are safe, and to make sure that those who I care about are safe. I can't control other people. I can only control me. I think that goes a long way towards at least not getting thrown out of ShopRite for having some harsh words for some people.
So I guess kind of going off of that, there is the idea you can only control yourself, but with this disease, it's kind of like also like, what would you do about, if you do everything right, you can still get it. So it's like kind of like this, like, it's a lot of stress, even if you feel like you are doing everything right. So how would you deal with the fact that, like, even with the right precautions, you can still catch it? Like, how do you address like the mental health effects of that?
So it's really tough, because it's tough to have that loss of control. Mm-hmm. And it's tough to say, oh, hey, like, yeah, like this terrible outcome can happen, even if I don't leave my house, even if I am wearing, an astronaut suit to leave the house, whatever. It is really tough to reckon with that, or to grapple with that loss of control. And so, honestly, for me, it helps to think about, well, really, there are so many things that we have less control over than we think we do. I can drive really safely. I can't control how anyone else drives. I can go fly on an airplane. I can't really control whether or not the maintenance was done properly on the airplane. It's not going to stop me from driving. It's not going to stop me from flying. So it's a question of knowing that there's only so much you can do, and realizing and determining and realizing what you feel comfortable doing and how you feel comfortable living your life, knowing that. And that's a different answer for everyone, and that's okay. But I guess accepting that whatever your answer is to that question is okay, is the key.
So what steps would you give to parents to like mentally prepare for if there are breakthrough cases in schools, even if the kids are older and vaccinated? Like, how would you prepare them for that kind of thing? Kind of going off of this question.
So it's a good question, honestly. So we talk about different sources of anxiety and fear, and we talk about those being based in the past, being based in the present, or being based in the future. Something my mom always said growing up, and I think it is very apt here, is don't worry about tomorrow's problems today. And while, hey, yes, there are absolutely things that are cause for concern, and saying, hey, like, oh my goodness, what if this happens? I certainly want to validate that fear, because it's a real fear. Knowing that, particularly going back to the vaccine, we're seeing in excess of 99% of the folks currently hospitalized aren't vaccinated. So if you're vaccinated, the good thing about getting the vaccine, particularly when the vaccine comes out for those under 12, is knowing that you have done everything that you can do. and knowing that even if, something happens where you are experiencing a breakthrough case, or there are breakthrough cases in your child's school, that it will still be manageable, and it will still be something that is not as scary or as foreboding as maybe it was a year and a half ago, if that makes sense, because we are in a much better place, I think, in terms of knowing how to deal with it and those precautions that we can take. I kind of rambled a bit, sorry.
No, that was great. So Laura used the B word in her last question. And I think that this is a word we're using a lot and we're hearing a lot. And it's one of those words that I think we kind of lose the meaning of the more it's said. I'm talking about breakthrough cases. And I feel like a lot of confidence in the vaccine went down a bit when we started seeing the breakthrough cases caused by the Delta variant. And I thought maybe we can get a better definition of what a breakthrough case is, how that, what that means in terms of being vaccinated, what we can do to prevent more breakthrough cases, and just kind of chat about that for a little bit, because that seems to be like the biggest news side by side Delta.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I will happily tackle that one. So breakthrough, the terminology sort of makes me cringe a little, because let's talk about that. So the vaccine was powered to prevent severe disease and hospitalization and death. So the vaccine, would we love for it to prevent infection, period, whether it's asymptomatic, mild, moderate, severe? Absolutely. But it was really powered to be able to prevent severe disease, hospitalization, and death. And it has absolutely done that beautifully. And so as we can see by the data, that the majority, 99% of patients in the hospital that get severe disease and 99% of patients that are unfortunately dying from this disease are those that are unvaccinated. It's really a disease of the unvaccinated at this moment. And so breakthrough cases are really defined as patients or any patient or any person, I'm saying patients in my world, any person who has been vaccinated and then goes on to develop disease. So it can be that you have totally asymptomatic disease, or you have very mild disease, you have a cough and runny nose, you lose your sense of taste and smell. That's considered breakthrough. But really what that is it's going to happen. I would be lying to you if I told you it wasn't going to happen. And unfortunately, it's happened a bit more because we're back to a lot of pre-pandemic mobility. I mean, we're back to socially doing a lot more things. Delta variant threw a huge loop for us because it changed enough that it made it more transmissible. And so I think that when we think about breakthrough cases, it's not a failure of the vaccine at all. The vaccine is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's just the reality of that it can still happen. And so what I tell folks is, and I used this analogy when I was sharing with everyone yesterday, and I would love to say I created it myself, but I didn't. Full disclosure. But with Delta, I think the way we should think about this is, if it's raining outside, you put your raincoat on. It's raining outside. I put my raincoat on. I don't want to get wet. But if it's pouring, I'm probably going to use my raincoat and my umbrella. So you are adding, with Delta, that's what you need to do. We need to be vaccinated. We also need to wear our mask and do all the other things that we're doing, particularly in settings that are indoors and in settings where you're closer than 6 feet, more than 15 minutes of exposure, essentially going back to all the same stuff. So don't be discouraged by breakthrough cases. I admit, I don't want to get COVID. I've been vaccinated. I don't want to get COVID, but if I still keep doing the things that I'm supposed to do, hopefully I won't get infected. But the vaccine is not going to stop us from ever getting infection.
I think that's where a lot of our bubbles burst at the beginning of this breakthrough issue over the summer, because we felt like we did the right thing. We got we got our vaccines. The CDC had said, you could stop wearing a mask if you're vaccinated, and we all threw parties. And I think, so it's been harder to rein people back in so that we can get them doing the right thing again, because it's not at all that the vaccine doesn't work or is a failure. I think we kind of thought about it in the wrong way, rather than it being just a tool in the toolbox to prevent against serious disease. It wasn't something that was going to prevent us from getting sick at all. So it's kind of a whole actual re-education process as well. So we were talking about masks and wearing our masks again, or still, and especially for our kids, the under 12s who haven't been vaccinated yet. And one of our community members asked us to ask you guys, what kind of masks you think are the best for kids? Are they helping prevent the Delta variant, or does Delta just pass right through a cloth mask? You had mentioned before that the Delta variant is so much more highly transmissible than the original. So is the mask helping? Is the virus particle itself any different?
Yeah, all good questions. So, cloth. So any mask, the better. There's a million masks out there. Pretty ones and child-friendly ones. And the deal with masks is that you want at least two layers, and you want something that is well fitted to your face. I have one son who wears one mask and it fits him beautifully. My older son, that same mask in a bigger size fits him terribly. So like, it's really like if you have multiple kids and you're like, I'm just going to buy a couple of sizes, and you put them on, you're like, oh, that doesn't fit well. So make sure it fits really well, and make sure it has at least two layers. Cloth masks are fine. Children do not need to be wearing KN95. If they are, it's fine, but they don't need to be wearing that. But I would say that, mask wearing is incredibly important. The Delta variant, the particle itself is not necessarily different. The mitigation strategies do not change. So it's not that you need a super heavy duty KN95, or it's another version of the N95 that has higher protection, but those masks tend to be a bit thicker, a bit more comfortable. But what I would say is kids, they're getting it more because we're pre-pandemic mobility, and they are more of the unvaccinated population, and Delta is more transmissible. So it's really that people are doing more things that can sort of allow you to get disease. But the Delta variant doesn't just pass through the mask. Wearing the mask protects the wearer. It also protects everybody else around the wearer. And originally we wore masks to protect everyone else, and inherently to protect ourselves. And now it's really important. If your child your child's the only one wearing a mask, it's great that they're wearing the mask and it offers a level of protection. But if everyone around them is not wearing a mask, that's also risky. So I think that's one of the hardest parts as a mom, because you can tell your kid who's gonna, stop and scream that they don't want to wear their mask when everybody else around them is not wearing a mask. It's a very hard lesson. And so I think, we talk sort of a lot about, like, this is what we do as a family. This is why we wear the mask. This is why it's important. And you're being a good example, because I think that this is important. And it's just really tough. I'm with all you parents out there. Realistically, it's hard. It's easy to say, just wear it, but to get them to wear it when no one else is doing it, even sometimes adults, hard.
Definitely that do as I say, and not wanting to be the only one in a crowd not doing something, when everybody is, it's uncomfortable for the little ones. We have a couple of community member questions that were just submitted. The first one, is there anything we can do to be prepared for a possible exposure? Everyone in my house is vaccinated except for my 6-year-old. So that's coming from a mainline parent community member. So similar to my house, I have one vaccinated child, 3 unvaccinated children. So what do we do to prepare for that exposure? And, what is even considered? I mean, that's my question. What is even considered an exposure anymore with the new data and the quarantines, and what do we do?
Sure. So it's still within, so schools have a couple nuances now. So most schools are social distancing between 3 and 6 feet. I think 3 feet is totally acceptable. I think it is. There's a lot of data to support that. The World Health Organization, that governs a lot of the world, has said 3 feet is acceptable. Now this is with masks, of course. So it's really still 15 minutes of continuous exposure, or more than 15 cumulative minutes in a 24-hour period, and closer than 3 feet. And the biggest key are both people wearing the mask. So for example, if you find out that another child that your child was sitting literally next to, maybe in science lab, because they weren't 3 feet apart, even though they're supposed to be 3 feet apart, and they were there for 45 minutes, would be considered an exposure, only if their masks were really off. It's really important about the masking part, because if the masks are on, the exposure risk is much lower. It's not zero, but it's lower. And the schools have sort of a very well-defined criteria. If you're passing, say there was a child in the 7th grade, because I'm just picking 7th grade because they move around typically from different classrooms. So especially when you are moving around, passing through hallways, intermittently waiting in the bathroom, those types of things, that's not an exposure. It's really a continuous amount of time, closer than 3 feet, and very much without a mask on. Now, teachers, for adults, it's a little different. Teachers, it's 6 feet. So the teachers are supposed to stay 6 feet apart. So you 6 feet apart from the children. So if a teacher in the class is sick and they're closer than 6 feet and they take their mask off for a period of time, certainly 15 minutes, that's considered an exposure. So I'll pause there.
So another question we have in our group kind of is in a similar vein, and there might be a lot of overlap with your answer. But I think there's a little bit of confusion about like what's safe in school in terms of the fact that they might have indoor lunch where they're not wearing a mask. They have recess where they're not wearing a mask. Like, why is it okay to have masked, unmasked lunch for 20 minutes, but then you're not wearing a mask when you're, sitting further apart? I think that it's just hard to understand. So maybe just explain that a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, every school district is a little bit different. And so I would say, depending upon the school district and their sort of health and safety plan and what they've got in place, a lot of schools are trying to eat outside. I mean, inevitably, kids have to eat, they have to drink, and it is nice for them to have sort of an allocated mask break or a point in time where we say, okay, this is a good point for a mask break. And recess, recess, a lot of kids they're saying you don't have to wear your mask at recess, you can be out and about playing around. It depends upon the school, so obviously there's a lot of nuances there. But I think the reality is you try to keep it to shorter than 15 minutes. Often lunch is not as short as 15 minutes, but if they're 3 feet apart, they're eating, we try to do the best we can, but I think there's no way of getting around that because there's just not physical space to be able to place them 6 feet apart to eat. I'm not aware of a school district that's able to do that unless they're doing it outside because it's just very challenging. So I get it. But I think it's the cumulative amount of time. The more time you have your mask off, if it's 20 minutes, 25 minutes versus the whole day, it's a big difference. And so I get it. It's hard. You think to yourself like, oh my gosh, lunch is like the high risk scenario. And it is the high risk scenario, but the hope is that really schools are trying to abbreviate it, keep it as sort of straight and streamlined as possible. Some school districts are doing, there's your dedicated seat for lunch, so people aren't roaming around the lunchroom. They're eating and they're making the gym into a cafeteria and trying to come up with creative ideas to try to be socially distant and not have as much congregation. But yeah, I think it's just the best we can do with what we know.
Mm-hmm.
Our next kind of topic hop is maybe, what advice do we have for the educators, the teachers and other staff in the building that are working so hard to adapt with their ever-changing classroom environments to engage their students? What advice do we have for them? They've kind of, been the ones at the forefront of all of this because children are such a huge concern, both their education and their mental health.
So it's a great question. I certainly see a lot of my friends who are teachers, pulling their hair out, going, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. This is changing, that's changing. So there are a few things. There's a school of thought that's called positive psychology. And positive psychology talks about the difference between surviving and thriving. And sometimes it takes one, sometimes it takes the other. Obviously we all want to be thriving. We want to be feeling great. We want to be, living our best lives, doing all of those wonderful things that we like to do. But sometimes it's necessary to just kind of be in survival mode. And what positive psychology talks about is that it's okay to acknowledge that it's okay to be in survival mode. I think a lot of the concerns that we're seeing are people saying, oh, well, such and such is going to be behind their reading benchmarks or their math benchmarks or their writing benchmarks. And it's certainly a valid concern. If there is a silver lining, though, it's that the entire cohort of kids in school right now is experiencing the same thing. And so longer term accommodations can be made if somebody is supposed to be at this benchmark and they're not, oh, well, hey, we're kind of seeing that across the board because everyone's experiencing this, and we can accommodate for that moving forward. As important as, say first grade or third grade or fifth grade or whatever grade is, it is not going to be the end all be all. And, within that, there are certainly things that teachers can also do to try and accommodate for that on a day-to-day basis, taking time out of the day to say, hey, for 10 minutes, guys, we're going to do a body scan and we're going to find where we have the anxiety. Is it in our chest? Is it in our stomachs? Is it in our arms? All right, we're going to figure out how to do relaxation so that we are better able to learn, and we are a little bit more at peace, and we are a little bit more prepared to engage in the classroom. Incorporating mindfulness and incorporating meditation can be great things on a day-to-day basis.
It's really good advice. It's something I think a lot of people, know in their heads, but it's really hard to put into action, and giving yourself the permission to do just that, survive rather than thrive. It makes me think back to the days when all my babies were little. We had a lot of kids all at once, 4 and 4 years. And, it was just like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? But, we knew we had a little bit more of an end date in sight than we do now with a global pandemic, that eventually they would all sleep or feed themselves, or, well, they still don't pick up their own clothes from the floor. So some things will never end. But yeah, it was just about making it through the day and surviving, even if it didn't mean we all ate the healthiest food and got in a trip to the zoo. It just meant we all ate a few meals and then went to bed. So I think it's important for parents to remember that it's, deal with the basics and live for the next day. I think, in my conversations with friends, and I see it a lot, in our daily lives, it's become very stressful just dealing with a lot of these unexpected things. And I know even when we were having our conversation leading up to this last week, we were talking about, a lot of these things just being in flux all the time, how to deal with these what ifs. We don't really know what's going to happen. So our brains are in overdrive trying to think of all of the possible scenarios and all of the possible outcomes and all of the what if this and what if that, what if we can't stay in school? What if we have to go hybrid? What if restaurants close? What if? So I was hoping maybe we can get some tips and tricks about how to, rework our own mental thought process into relaxing and
Sure.
dealing with those what ifs as they come.
Sure. So the what if, there's another part of that that's not said. It's not just the what if, it's what if this happens and the worst possible outcome happens as a result of that.
Right. It's the what if to the nth exponent, because our brains do that to us.
If we go hybrid and my little one who's in kindergarten never actually goes to school and just graduates entirely online, and that's it. What if, we have to go back into lockdown, and not only are we out of toilet paper, but this time we're also out of apples and, all sorts of weird things. It's what we call catastrophizing,
Yes.
So it's assuming that the worst possible thing will happen. And the way that you can, kind of combat that is, I like to think of it, and this is a weird analogy, and all of my kids make fun of me when I use this analogy, but have you guys ever seen those quarter things? It's like a big cone, and you put a quarter on the side, and it starts rolling slowly, and it gets faster and faster and faster and faster and faster, and then it falls down the little hole in the middle.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think anxiety and what ifing is kind of like that, because you put a quarter in and it starts slowly, and then it gets faster, 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 and then it falls down the black hole, kind of like we do. So a way to combat that is by checking our reality and saying, okay, hey, what if we go online? Let me ask myself that. What if we go online? Okay, then we'll be online for a month or so. And I mean, that's kind of it. Like, what if we go back into lockdown? Okay, we'll go back into lockdown, and there will be unforeseen circumstances and, things that crop up that are weird, and we'll run out of apples or whatever, but I'll have a home and my family will be okay, and I'll be here. And just doing that reality testing to, the reason I use the analogy is I say to my kids, like, okay, you got to figure out how to stop the quarter from spinning. and just reminding ourselves that the worst possible thing is not going to happen every single time, and actually testing that reality.
Yeah. I think that's really good advice in general, like just for lifelong anxiety.
Right, not just during pandemic times.
Yeah, definitely.
Or times, as I started calling them way back when.
Definitely. So this is shifting gears again, just looking at community submissions as they're coming in. Someone asked about data about if we have data available about unvaccinated children, like children who are at this point are not eligible for the vaccine, and the rates that they're getting the Delta variant in states that have a higher vaccination rate in eligible adults versus not. Have you seen the difference?
So I think the pediatric rates, so I'll start with this, and the pediatric rates of disease we're seeing about 25, around anywhere between 23, 27%, depending upon the data that you look like. So to contrast, so right now, 23 to 27% of children are not, I shouldn't say of children, of the cases of COVID-19 are in pediatric patients. That's the better way to put that. So that is a little bit of a contrast from maybe a year ago when we had testing for kids, because remember for a while there we didn't even test kids. And it was probably sort of sitting in the 15 to 20%. So we are up a bit on that. And it absolutely correlates. The higher rates are where there's higher transmission, and in states where there's higher transmission. Then you say to yourself, okay, let's look at the states with higher transmission. Are those states that have lower vaccine rates? Yes, they are. Absolutely correlates. I look at the CDC website is great, but I find it sometimes hard to navigate, even as a medical provider that looks at the website often, daily. I like the New York Times COVID-19 website. I think it is very easy to read. And if you look at their maps, I think their maps are easy, and you can see that thankfully in our part of the country, our vaccination rates are higher. But you can see in the South, I'm from Arkansas, my parents live in Arkansas, I hear about this ad nauseum, but if you look at the South and you look, those vaccine rates are very low. Absolutely, those are where children and anybody that's unvaccinated are having more hospitalizations. So do I have direct data that says that, like looking at vaccinated higher vaccination rates in states equals lower pediatric infections and hospitalizations? Not necessarily, but I think you can infer it from the information that we have. So I think that by virtue of living in this part of the country, since we have higher vaccination rates, we're a little bit protected, quote unquote. But I do worry that if you go and move to Tennessee right now, where the rates are very, very high, your unvaccinated child has more than a 25% risk of, it's hard to put it in that words, but absolutely that's where the concern is. Mm-hmm. So it's hard because you can't protect your child if they're not eligible for the vaccine. You can't protect them just with the vaccine because they're not eligible yet. So that means you have to do everything else well.
So I think that was all of the questions that have been submitted during our chat this morning by our community group. I just wanted to give both of you the opportunity to add any final thoughts. Do you think we missed anything? Is there any other advice you would give to parents of young or older children about keeping them safe, both in physical health and in mental health during these trying times, as everybody keeps calling them? Even in TV commercials, it gets a little eye-rolly now. But just anything, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah. So
Matt, you want me to?
Oh,
go ahead. No, you're fine. You go ahead.
And as a perfectly on cue, a year and a half in, we're still doing the talking over each other on Zoom. But yeah, I think I've been asked, how do I know if my child is struggling? How do I know if my child is having a hard time? Ask. And they may not have the vocabulary to describe what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, but going up to them and saying, hey, how are you doing? Like, what's going on? I'm seeing that you're more worried. I'm seeing this. And just having a conversation with them, because a lot of times they'll be more open than you think they will, or you'll be able to see just in how they're answering, just how much they're struggling. you know, so just talking to them can really go a long way. So I would encourage everyone to talk to your kids and ask how they're doing, check in.
Yeah, I think I am by no means a mental health professional, but I think as a parent, I echo that, because I just had the experience with one of my sons that he's not really interested in COVID. He's interested because he can't do the things he used to do, but he goes to school, and our life has been altered because of it. And he sees me go to work, and he sees all the things that have had to change. And so he didn't seem like he was struggling, but when I asked him, and like, how are you feeling about that? He says, you seem worried about that, and talking to me. And I was like, oh, it's interesting. He picked up on that. And maybe maybe I seem worried because I'm working more and I'm talking about it more and I'm on call. And I said, well, are you worried? He's like, yeah. I'm like, oh, okay, let's talk about this. And I thought it was he's 10 years old. He's in 5th grade now. And I thought it was very interesting. So separate piece from that, I have learned to just ask more questions and just see how they're feeling about it, because I would never outwardly would have known that he was thinking that. So that's truth and unrelated from what I was going to say, which to me, I think the most important thing I could say now is that try to get, as much, I think when if your child is going to be vaccine eligible anytime soon, if your child's like my boys are 7 and 10, start thinking about the vaccine, because you want to arm yourself with as much knowledge about it so you can make the right decision for you and your family. And I think, the vaccine is going to be key in keeping kids healthy and keeping schools open and keeping us moving forward. So I would recommend the vaccine when kids are eligible. Start thinking about it now, because it's going to happen, thankfully. And then the second thing is, please, 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 wear your mask regardless of vaccination status, because I think with Delta, we have to put that umbrella up and say, we just need some extra protection here. And I'm an infectious disease doctor. I never stop wearing my mask, but that's just because I see and know too much. But I think that, and I'm also a little bit crazy, but I also thought, I think that the CDC and the Delta variant really is commanding us to do that, because you saw what just happened. No one thought that the rates would look like this now. No one. And they have. And so I think if you can just, wear your mask regardless of vaccination status and just keep doing that, I know it stinks, but there is an end to this. There is an end. It is not indefinite. We will always have COVID around us, but it will never be as bad as it is now if we can get control of the virus. So it might be a year. I'm not saying it's going to be tomorrow, but it's not going to always be this way. And so I feel confident in that.
That's a great advice to end on. I love the idea of, wearing our raincoat and carrying our umbrella, put that umbrella up, use all of the tools. Thank you both so much for being here to chat with us, to prep ahead with us last week and mulling over our conversation questions over the weekend while you're spending time with your families. Thank you to Mainline Health and to Nemours for having another one of these community conversations with us that we could share with our readers. Thank you to my team at Mainline Parent and Philadelphia Family for supporting us to get through this live event here today on the back end. And we hope you all have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.